Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're not just retelling a famous story from the American West, we're correcting the record. So let's just start with a question, because I think it gets right to the heart of what we're talking about today. Why is it that we seem to remember failure more than success? Why do the stories of disasters stick, while these incredible stories of triumph just fade away? Okay, so when I say pioneers crossing the Sierra Nevada, what's the first name that pops into your head? For almost everyone, it's Donner, right? A story of just unimaginable tragedy. But what if I told you that the real story, the more important story, the one that actually opened the trail, happened 2 years before that? It's a story of incredible triumph led by the Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party. And right at the center of it all was this amazing, almost completely forgotten woman. So who was this woman? Her name was Elizabeth Townsend. And to really understand her, you have to know that her story doesn't begin on some dusty wagon trail. Nope, it starts way before that, with the kind of quiet competence that would end up being the key to everyone's survival. Just listen to this. This is from a letter she wrote to her sister, talking about how she treated her own husband, who was a doctor. You hear that? That's not a nervous assistant just following orders. That is the voice of a confident, skilled medical partner. And for 12 years, that's exactly what she was. Her husband's right-hand woman, a real practitioner whose skills were probably taken for granted most of the time. And look, this kind of toughness, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was forged in some serious hardship. She was the daughter of Swiss and French immigrants, but she was orphaned at a young age. So what did she do? She basically became a surrogate mother to her younger brother, Moses. This life of constant responsibility, of sacrifice, of just getting things done with her own two hands. It was pretty much the perfect, if brutal, training ground for the journey that was waiting for them. And all of that toughness, that medical know-how, that sheer grit, it all came to a head at this one critical moment. We're talking November 1844 at the base of the Sierra Nevada, with snow already starting to fall. Okay, so picture this. Winter is slamming the doors shut, way earlier than anyone expected. Their oxen, the engines of this whole expedition, are literally starving. The leaders, these seasoned guys named Elisha Stevens and Caleb Greenwood, they had to make a call, and they made a really smart strategic one. They decided to hedge their bets. They'd split the party and send a small, fast-moving group to try and break through to California. And guess who was chosen for this elite team, this horseback party of 6? Elizabeth. Now, this was not some random choice. She was picked because she was what they called an accomplished horsewoman. And let me tell you, that phrase went so much more than just being good at riding a horse. It meant you had elite physical fitness. It meant you had incredible endurance and mental toughness. It meant you were on par with any of the hardened mountain men on that trip. But think about what this meant for her. This honor, it came at an unbelievable personal cost. In an age where women were pretty much expected to stay by their husband's side, Elizabeth made the choice to leave hers, Dr. Townsend and her brother Moses, the boy she'd raised like a son. She was literally riding off into a blank spot on the map, with absolutely no guarantee she would ever see the two most important people in her life again. Okay, so here they are, this small group of 6, staring down a mountain range that no American had ever successfully crossed, and winter is breathing down their necks. How on earth did they do it? Right? I mean, that's the million-dollar question. They had no maps, no trail to follow. They had no clue what was on the other side. How could they possibly pull this off when, just 2 years later, the Donner Party would fail so catastrophically in the same place? Well, the answer reveals this other piece of the story that history just chose to forget. The secret is they had guides. Yeah, they weren't just stumbling through the wilderness hoping for the best. Their very survival was hanging by a thread, and that thread was held by some critical and, for a very long time, completely unacknowledged help. They were not alone out there. And here it is, the forgotten truth of their entire journey. The Washoe people, who had called this region home for thousands of years, they were the key. They were the ones who provided the guidance that saved them. They literally led the party from one encampment to the next, following these ancient, well-established routes. All that indigenous knowledge about the trails, where to find water, where to find shelter, that was the invisible map that got them through this frozen labyrinth. It's not an exaggeration to say that map saved their lives. So, you look at the numbers, 25 days, 200 miles, 0 maps. And that's impressive, sure. But to really get a sense of how hard this was, you have to understand this was so much more than just a long horseback ride. Yeah, this wasn't a hike. Think of it more like a 3-week vertical climb through a frozen maze. They were scrambling down treacherous, icy river canyons, forcing their horses across swollen, freezing rivers. It was just this brutal, relentless, day-in, day-out fight against the raw power of the mountains in the middle of winter. So when Elizabeth and the rest of the horseback party finally, and I mean miraculously, stumbled into Sutter's Fort, you'd think her journey was over. But for her, the most important part of her mission was just getting started. I mean, can you imagine? After weeks of that ordeal, totally exhausted, what does she do? She immediately starts this relentless campaign. Her brother Moses, remember him? He had volunteered to stay behind and guard the wagons. And now he was trapped, all alone under 10 feet of snow at the lake we now call Donner Lake. And Elizabeth was just not going to let him be forgotten. And Moses' story is incredible in itself. For more than 2 months, he survived out there completely alone, trapping foxes for food, reading books just to keep from going crazy. But the real reason he survived? It was because of what was happening 100 miles away. Elizabeth just kept pushing, begging one of the party members, a guy named Dennis Martin, to go back for her brother. And he had made a promise to her, and incredibly, he kept it. He went back and found Moses, gaunt and emaciated, but alive. But you know, this incredible, harrowing journey, it was really just one chapter in Elizabeth's life, a life that was all about partnership, building communities, and service. Once they got to California, the Townsends became pillars of the new community. They set up San Francisco's very first licensed medical practice. Her husband, Dr. Townsend, was elected alcalde. That's basically the mayor. And in 1848, when they had a son, what did they name him? John Henry Moses Townsend, a tribute right there to the brother she would not give up on. And their story, well, it ends exactly as they lived, together. When the cholera epidemic hit San Jose in 1850, they didn't run. They waded right into the heart of the crisis to treat the sick, and they died together, serving their community right to the very end. And that brings us back to this great, tragic irony of how we tell history. The Stephens-Townsend-Murphy Party. They're the ones who proved the trail could be conquered. Their planning, their competence, their resilience, they opened the door to California. But 2 years later, the Donner Party's horrific, sensational catastrophe on that same route created a story so grisly, so shocking, that it just completely buried the story of triumph that made it all possible in the first place. Her triumph, not their tragedy, is the true story of the trail. Think about it. She didn't just cross the Sierra. She proved it could be done. She was a mother, a medic, a trailblazer. She rode headfirst into the great unknown, trusting in her own strength and absolutely refusing to abandon her family. Her courage, it literally opened California. Her selflessness helped build its first communities. And her refusal to be defined or limited by the expectations of her era, that stands as the pioneer spirit at its absolute, unvarnished finest. And that is a story that deserves to be remembered.
This biographical sketch is brought to you by the Sunnyvale Historical Society and Museum Association. For over 70 years, bringing history to life through the stories of westward-bound pioneers. And History Expeditions, faithfully retracing the steps of America's most notable trailblazers over the Sierra Nevada.